It is Wednesday, January 8th at 7:32, and I call this meeting of the Finance and Budget Committee to order. Usually, we're going to be meeting for the next 3 Wednesdays. I'll explain the rationale to that. But right now, to the new members, just at least just say who you are and a little bit of background. And then when we come back to having more people here, we'll introduce who we are back to you. I was just locked in the office. So, Per, why don't you start and we'll go from there.
Sure. I'm Per Sexa. I've been a resident of Darien for 30 years now. Can't believe it's that long. Member of St. Luke's Church. I've been active in the community in a number of ways, primarily through person to person, and through St. Luke's Church and its volunteer activities. I'll just stop there.
Okay, who else do we have that's new here? Dan, do you want to introduce yourself? Hi, Holly.
Hey, how are you?
I got the first part. Don't worry about it.
Okay.
Hey, this is Dan. I'm sorry. I'm on the train. I meant to be back sooner, but coming back from my office in the city. I'm Dan Noble. I'm relatively new to Darien. I've been here about 4.5 years. My husband is the rector of St. Luke's Church, so that's how I know Per, Ryan Fleener, and we live on Ringdon Road. And I'm an attorney by training. And I have a little bit of background in finance. I did investment banking for a couple of years before going to law school. And my law practice is focused mostly on white collar criminal work on both the prosecution and the Fed side. And most of my involvement in Darien has been through the Democratic Town Committee. I'm the current treasurer and also done some stuff through St. Luke's Church as well.
So the one thing I will say is that thank you for providing that information, but the RTM is in theory a nonpartisan organization. So don't identify, this is the
Jack, it's not theory, it's part of the town statute.
yes, that's true.
No, I totally understand that. I was just explaining my involvement in town.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
My
That's
experience
fine.
with financial
I
stuff.
understand, and I wasn't.
Yeah.
I'm busting your chops. But this is back to the don't say, don't tell type of thing.
Got it.
Although-
I didn't know it was don't ask, don't tell. I'm familiar with that. So
Oh, yeah. So poor choice of an example. All right. Who else was assigned last night? Mike, you were at our last meeting, so you did your introduction. So did you, Doug. So did where's the other? Oh, Peter. The other Peter did it. So okay. Interesting enough, on our F&B committee, we have 5 attorneys.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, thank goodness.
Wait, can I raise my hand and object, or am I outnumbered?
No. I joke with my daughter, who's an attorney, that the only thing she knows about math is and finance is when she does her billing. And then she reminds me that she doesn't do the billing; somebody else in the firm does it for her. So, all right, we did the introduction. One other quick discussion about FOIA. When I send out a memo to the whole committee, we're not allowed to reply all, because that constitutes a FOIA violation, because it's as if we're having an unannounced meeting. So if there's something you have to say, reply to me. There's several things that I'm going to say, copy myself and Bill Smith, or copy myself and Beth and Peter, because Beth and Peter manage the Board of Ed budget, and Bill manages the Board of Selectmen budget. Of course, I get involved in them as well. But it's just, we have 15 people. Any email that has 8 people on it, we can't do reply alls. Now, we're going to talk about working groups that we're going to have with the Board of Finance and other districts, other committees. And in those, you can do reply all because it's a working group on the budget. So some people will say that's a violation of FOIA, but that's just how we actually have to work. But yeah, please don't hit reply all because the town clerk then comes and says you violated again. So, so that we can. Okay. I sent around the meeting schedule. Let's see if I can do this. Set out, go here, and is that share screen? This. Okay, so this is now being shown as part of the meeting. I have 2 sections here. We'll first go through. There we go. I had to add a meeting in February from the original document that I sent out, and that was because I realized that our February 6th meeting was before the Rules Committee met, and therefore we wouldn't know what we were being assigned or have some of the documentation on that. So I threw in the 12th to add another meeting there. There's a lot, and I will cancel if there's no reason to have a meeting. But since there's some changes and we have a lot of new people, I want to be able to make sure that everybody understands what's going on. The color-coded meetings is because when I put together the budget and our meeting schedule, I have to integrate the Board of Ed, the Rules Committee, the Board of Finance, and the Board of Selectmen meetings, as well as our RTM meeting. And since I'm on rules, I also, as is Peter, we also put that down there so we know that Peter and I aren't having a conflict of what we have to do. But basically, all the meetings that I have listed on here are meetings that you should be following. Doesn't mean you have to go to them, although on the Board of Selectmen, if you can, that's great. They're all recorded. And so I'm going to suggest that you do go and listen to the recording. If there's something that goes on at a Board of Selectmen meeting during the course of the year, which is going to deal with a resolution that we're going to be dealing with, to try and keep our employees from having to show up at our virtual meetings, I will be sending out with some timestamp to please listen to this before the meeting. And then if there's any questions that you have, then you can send it to myself and I'll get it to the department head to see if I can get answers, or if there's a lot, I will invite them to come join us, which they don't mind so much because we're virtual. Better than them having to hang out to 7:30 at night and then go to a meeting there, which they will do. So these are just what's there. What I'd like to do is have a motion to approve the meeting schedule that is on the second tab. Can I have a motion for that? I'm going to unshare this.
I'll make a motion, Jack, to approve
Okay,
the
so
proposed meeting agenda.
They're doing that.
I second
And
it.
I have Beth seconding. All in favor, raise your hand. Dan, just say yes.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so that passes unanimously. Okay. What I'm gonna ask is 5 and 6, to later in the meeting. I do want to go through how we look at the budget. And that is, we're going to go and attend our own budget meetings when they're presented, or listen to the Board of Ed discussions, or listen to the discussions of what takes place at there, and then also the Board of Finance. But we also, back about 10 years ago, John Zagroski and I set up something that we referred to as the buddy system, where members of F&B and members of the Board of Finance will review a section of the budget together so that they know our thoughts, we know their thoughts, and we try the best we can to incorporate the other RTM committee who has responsibility for that. I'll be sending out our next meeting a scope document that outlines the primary and secondary responsibilities for all of the RTM committees. And not everything has budget ramifications, but as F&B, anything that we're not assigned as primary, we have secondary responsibility on financial matters. Anything that's bonded, we will be the primary committee to discuss the finances, and then the other committees assigned will give the details of what that's trying to accomplish. When I first joined, the member of F&B described also what was going on in the bonding. We don't need to worry, as we will look at that, but we're not going to be reporting. It'll be in my report that I hand in, but they're really responsible for the detail. Now, part of the concept of having the buddy system is that it ends up delivering technical expertise within the committee. So people tend to follow doing the same items year after year. And last year we had 10, 11 members. Now we have 15. So that's going to give an opportunity for people to decide, like I know Bill did a lot last year. And I took off what our other two, we had 2 members join the Board of Finance. So they were here for our budget, but they subsequently joined the Board of Finance this year. So I've taken their names off the list. I'm going to go through real quickly what some of these are, but I'm not going to sign tonight, but please send back to me, or just give me a call and we can discuss, because I want you to be doing things that interest you. All right. So, and then we'll divvy things up which interests nobody. But we break down some of the areas. So public works, I have the prior year's Board of Finance members here. They haven't been assigned yet, nor have the committees. So like what I do have here is the chair of the respective committee of the area. So land use actually covers all of the P&Z and building department. General overhead, actually, we're primary on that because it fits no other committee. So that's the finance department, the tax assessor, the tax collector, the treasurer, and a couple of other admin spots that we have that all fits into general. Human services is those things, so the youth commission and some of the other things that are there. Public works not only does what we think of public works does, but they also have responsibility for the sewer authority and the parking commission. So and the parking commission is actually the Board of Selectmen as well. They just are on both. And then fire and emergency, we have 3 volunteer fire departments, which are probably the best firemen in the state of Connecticut. There's certain expenses they pay. The town purchases, they own their buildings. We buy their equipment and handle some of their operating. We have the library. That's a grant that we give. Louisa has graciously taken over for that. But it's not a small grant. It's about $4 million a year. We cover their operating costs, the capital costs, and the purchase of books are done by the Friends of the Library. So there is a little bit of a split there. And we do split their personnel that work there. Some get assigned to the Friends, some get assigned to the town's grant. And any monies that the library does not spend in the grant money gets returned at the end of the year. On the Board of Ed, we have broken it down to be personnel and related expenses, which apparently will be a big item this year. Capital equipment and leases, and Beth and Peter, I believe, did the tour, so they'll give us an update on that. Did anybody else do the tour other than Beth, you and Peter from our committee?
I don't think so. I think that was it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just us.
And then we have non-educational expenses and grants and revenues, which we all did a pretty bad job on the grants last year because we approved a Title I grant, and apparently Darien no longer met the poverty criteria from the last census. And so we lost that Title I grant of 150, and so they didn't pick it up at the Board of Ed. We didn't pick it up at the Board of Finance, and we didn't pick it up at F&B. So nor did education. We're going to take a better look at to understand. That's in the appendix of the Board of Ed package. So that big sheet, if you go to the end, they have an appendix with all these grants listed. And so I want a better understanding of that. Debt service is looking at what we're paying. What the Board of Finance has been doing is trying to level the debt service. So at times you'll see in the first 2 years they're not paying principal, they're doing interest only in anticipation that we're going to be paying down other debt, and therefore in 2 years we'll pick it up. We are doing a lot of bond anticipation notes and rolling things over. And we've been doing that on both HHR and the purchase of Great Island. So all of Great Island is not yet bonded, but it's about 93 million. It's not the 103 that people have been talking about. The Board of Finance rescinded 11 million of the original authorization. Then there's some federal and state grants that the town gets. There's fund balance, which is all the money goes into a single account, essentially. I mean, there's reserve accounts with things, but that's where everything is paid for. So the Board of Ed payroll is paid out of a town payroll account, right? And we refer to that all as the general fund that encapsulates all those various funding. And then also the grand list and the collection rate. The town does a 5-year average of what our collection has been. And then we reduce it by about 25 basis points because there's always challenges to the assessments and there could always be a slight change in that. But we have a very high collection rate, probably about 99% or more. And that 25 basis points is about a $300,000 to $400,000 coverage that we have that allows us to give us some flexibility. It also means that if we collect more at the end of the year, that's moved into the general fund. General fund expenses, unless there's a special appropriation, will only be used for paying down debt or capital. It is not used to pay down operating expenses. So unless there's a special appropriation that comes off cycle, that's the only time we're going to use that fund for an operating expense. Otherwise, it's simply capital and debt. So take a look at these. When I hand out the when I hand out what we refer to as the scope document, that'll list all these various committees and other things that you're seeing there. It gives you a better definition of the items. We will not have access to the Board of Selectmen budget until the 22nd of January, which will give us more detail. It's an online budget in OpenGov. There were some changes in OpenGov, so our town administrator and also acting director of finance, because that was her prior role before she became town administrator. We don't have her replacement yet. Is going to do a short video that'll explain all new members will be given access to OpenGov. We're the only committee, that RTM committee, that every one of our members will have access to. I mean, it's also online, the budget, but in OpenGov, we're able to get more information because there's drop-down boxes that explains what goes on and other things that's in. So take a look at this. If you have any questions to figure out what you're assigned to, let me know. For those that have been assigned, Bill and Bill, you guys covered a lot of things last year. So if you want to be a little more narrow on what you're doing, let me know and we'll arrange that. I will put at least one person who's experienced, even if that means that I'm doing it, with everyone new. So you kind of get the idea of what's going on. We are allowed to disagree with an approach from the Board of Finance. We don't need to rubber stamp what everybody else is thinking. That's one of the things that has really made this committee into a special committee. I don't know if Beth or Peter, you want to, talk about that, or give, or Bill for that matter. Bill Smith is, and myself are the two longest serving members on this committee. Both of us have about 20 years. So, so.
Hey, Jack.
Yeah.
Just so that I'm following this correctly, because I'm getting this pyramid of committee on committee on committee, and I'm a little just confused. So we're on the F&B committee.
Mhm.
As part of that, we sit in, or listen to presentations like the Board of Ed budget discussion and so forth, so that we're as informed as we can be. This allocation of us to each of the committees on the list, is that therefore like just a similar obligation that we're taking on?
Oops,
Sorry.
I'm going to silence. Here we
There.
go.
So is it similar to like sitting through the Board of Ed? You're going to sit through the subcommittee here, or the committee, I'll use Public Works as an example. If I were assigned to Public Works, I would be listening to their meetings and discussions, or at least seeing them afterwards.
Yeah. So the ordinance of the that we currently have is referred to as Appendix B, says the Finance and Budget Committee is supposed to have at least one liaison from a financial level with all the other committees of the RTM. While they may have subject matter responsibility for public works, we'll use that. We are also responsible for the financial aspects of what goes on in public works. So, because our job is to be the liaison, and this is also in the ordinance, our committee is the liaison from the Board of Finance back to the RTM. So part of my responsibility is, like, there's a change which we're going to get into on how the Board of Selectmen are doing their budget this year. So it's my responsibility to make sure that all the other committee chairs that have Board of Selectmen responsibility know what the change is. If there's a need for additional people to work together, we sort of filter everything from the RTM. And the concept of bringing the Board of Finance, another RTM committee, and us together is that all three of them have responsibility for that department's or that area's budget. And it's better that the three groups are all communicating of what we think, as opposed to anybody being surprised on the floor of the RTM when we do our budget. The other thing is, and this has always been my position, the Board of Finance is going to be approving their budget in April. The Board of Selectmen and the Board of Ed will be approving their budgets in February. If you want to make a change to that budget, it's better to speak up before they approve it, because the horse has already left the barn. And so we try to have our thoughts prior to the Board of Selectmen or the Board of Ed approving their budget. We try to have our thoughts on that budget prior to the Board of Finance approving that budget. And then on the night of the budget, with the exception of the Education Committee introducing the education budget, it's an F&B meeting. Essentially, you will see, if as chair, I will be leading the meeting on virtually every resolution that we're doing on the night of the budget, because we have primary responsibility. Now, we'll do the introduction. We'll talk about the finances of it, and we're going to see the subject matter committees also reporting on it, and they're going to get into the weeds. Now, we're going to still look at the weeds, but it's their responsibility to discuss that part of the budget. So it is sort of checks and balances even within the RTM, make sure that everything is covered. And we look at things differently. There's times that we may, we've done certain cuts to a particular department, and the committee that's responsible for that department have a different opinion than F&B. So, but at least we know it, but that still may not mean that F&B may not do a motion to cut one of the Board of Selectmen budgets or the full Board of Ed budget from the floor of the RTM. We've done that and been successful at producing budgets. The other thing I should mention is on the Board of Ed, we do not have line item veto. We're going to give them a total appropriation. And how they spend that money, that's the responsibility of the Board of Ed. So the Board of Finance and the RTM can only give them a full appropriation. Other than capital, we can cut capital.
And
we have line item veto on capital.
To amplify that comment, that's because the Board of Ed's statutory authority comes from the state of Connecticut and not from the town.
Right, they're elected by the town and funded by the town, but their authority comes from the State Department of Education. Different for the Board of Selectmen. We have line item veto. We can go into somebody's expense line item and say, you're ordering too many magazines. We're cutting it. I'm being certain which one I'm doing, but essentially we can do that. And so we want to make sure that we have a good understanding of it. And what that also does by working with the committees, as well as the Board of Finance, we over time have developed subject matter expertise within our committee. So in the past, Terry Duffy understood the parking authority better than anybody else that I knew, other than the gentleman who wrote how the parking authority works, who was on the Board of Selectmen. So we want to have that expertise built in our committee, because you'll find that people ask us questions. So we should understand how things operate. So yes, we will interact with the rest of the committee. And the key is, I'm going to use one of Peter's favorite terms, but mine as well. The concept is not to have analysis paralysis. It's to look at it, make our comments, and move on and have decisions made. And we can all agree on something, or we can agree to disagree. So, does that help explain it better?
Yes, that was good. Thank you.
Okay. And I apologize, because some of us have been doing this for so long. You're going to have to raise your hand and say, wait, go through that again. Because there's things that are in our heads, and sometimes we forget to tell you about them. So, and that's not a problem if we do. So, that's care. 7, and with that, we can go back to number 5. Okay. I will tell you, on the meetings, we're going to meet a lot because we have so many new members. And on the 18th, we have to provide comments to the Board of Ed on their budget of January. So we're going to need to put that together at our 13th meeting. And then we're meeting the day after the Board of Selectmen gives their high-level presentation, so we at least know what's going on. And then I also want to show everyone, especially new, how we put the budget together. So, like, when I was speaking to a couple of the parents on the marathon Saturday meeting, and I mentioned that we've done $164 million of approval of debt, which will cost this town someplace between $12 to $13 million a year, in a rough estimate. They didn't understand that that's part of the town's budget, that the town has to pay off that debt. And so when people are saying, well, the school budget's only been really growing by 3.5%. No, when you add the debt on, it's been growing by a lot more. And when you add what they're doing in capital otherwise, you have to look at the total picture of that. And we'll explain where it is in the budget so that everybody understands where things are going, and as well as how the mill rate is calculated. The mill rate is a mathematical exercise. We have our grand list that gets adjusted for certain credits that are given, and as well as what we think we're going to collect minus the 25 basis points. And then we have all the expenses, which are going to be capital that's not bonded, the operating budgets, the library grant, and the debt that we're paying off this year. And those are the things, that's the numerator, the grand list, the denominator, and that's how we get to the mill rate. So we're sort of up in the front part, but you should see the final part on how this is calculated, which will help you understand how things are going. I was surprised that I was explaining that, yeah, when we've HHR, which is 103 million, we've already bonded 23 million of it, and there'll be more bonding to that this year as they're getting going. But there's a cost to it. And while the town is the only one who can bond, and so it shows up in the town budget, that's an expense. It's not, you can't just look at the Board of Ed's operating budget and say, well, that's the only cost to the school. That's not a true statement. So that only added more confusion. But we're going to go through some of our documents that I showed last year so you can follow why we're doing certain things. All right. Beth and Peter, do you want to, the school does a tour. They used to do it in March after they approved their budget, which was kind of silly. And they had the revelation to do it in December so that before they're presenting the budget, we could see what they're requesting in capital. It was done December 7th or something on a Saturday. It's a great tour to go to. And this year I decided that it was too early. So, but Beth and Peter went to it and it's usually recorded. This year it was also not recorded, which would have had, if I had known that, I probably would. But I'll let Beth and Peter give an overview of what they saw.
Yeah. Well, the tour consisted of all the schools, some of which don't actually have capital projects this year, but the HHR schools are all under construction. So Hindley, Holmes, and Royal are all under construction. And so rather than being a tour of like what the upcoming capital projects were, it was actually a tour to show how the construction is coming along and what the end result will be. And I mean, in all of them, like portable classrooms are being taken away and actual classrooms are being added. At Hindley, they're getting rid of the hideous, weird brick thing at the front that's the library that should never have been added to the building. So that's cause for celebration. And we just, went through and saw how they're changing things. In some cases, it's a long-term project. I mean, they're all long-term projects, but some of them, once they've built the addition, they then have to reconfigure a bunch of the rooms in the interior. So that will be next year. They'll finish the new classrooms and then they have to shift all the other classrooms around while they take down interior walls so that the classrooms are all the correct size. Royal in particular has a lot of very tiny classrooms that kids are sort of crammed into. And it's nowhere near the square footage per child that the state requires or requests anyway. So there's a bunch of that sort of thing going on. So those will be long-term projects, but none of those appear on the capital budget for this year.
I mean, the interesting thing is having, approved a bunch of capital budgets in the last several years. It was actually gratifying to see some of the work that actually had gotten done.
Yeah.
So, and I think it's you get a real sense of the impact of what we do in terms of approving these projects, and some of them can be I would say contentious. Like I think we at the high school there was a leak in the cafeteria roof. There was actually it was a green roof. Okay, it's supposed to be a roofing design that would collect water and channel it away so that it could be used for other purposes. But the roof itself was supposed to be grass, growing grass, and And there was a big leak there, and we were able to see it and see everything that was loose. And we also saw where all all the tiles are damaged by the cafeteria, which again, way back, when there was a not a big controversy, but it was uh,
Intention.
contentious discussion about how we should repair the cafeteria in what was then a school that was only about 8 or 9 years old. So it just illustrates and gives you an understanding of what things are actually being done and what need to be done, and you also get an appreciation for the architects, the engineers, the construction folks, and the building committee that oversees it, which is actually an important thing. And when we get into capital projects and where there's like Jack, I don't remember what the capital threshold is, but
$1 million.
all right, over $1 million. If we want to build something in this town, we have to have a building committee, and that has generally brought in projects under budget, ahead of schedule. So it's a good practice. We'd like to keep it up.
Well, especially one other nuance on the schools. All the schools are actually owned by the town, not by the Board of Ed. And the Board of Ed has maintenance, care, and custody, maintenance, and something else to manage the schools, maintain them, and that. But if there's any capital improvement for the town, like $1 million for the cafeteria, they have to set up building committee and get approval from the Board of Selectmen to move forward with that prior to it even going to the Board of Finance or the RTM.
Yep.
Go ahead, Charles.
Any questions?
Yeah, once we finish the HHR renovations, Oxford has been redone. Is there any other major capital projects with regards to the school systems once these 3 renovations are done, or is this?
Well,
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Middlesex and Tokenique are going to have work that's going to need to be done.
And the high school.
And
but
the high
that's on-
school.
And
Yeah,
the high school.
We
But-
forget who, I remember when we passed the darn the referendum approving to build the high school, it's still over 25 years ago. So
Yeah.
these things are getting not older, but they have some age and wear and tear.
20 years ago, because my daughter was the
Yeah.
first freshman class. So I know exactly when that one started, and she's now 33. So it's about 20 years ago when we opened up the high school, but 25 years from when we took down the old one and built a new one.
Middlesex will likely be the big one because that's an older building and needs, I don't know what the specifics are going to be, but right now, but I think we all understand it's going to be not a small number.
Yeah. Well, and in addition, the high school will, in the 5 years that they've put forth in their current budget, they show capital projects going down a ways. One of the things they're talking about is like they're going to have to re-roof part of the high school, and that's looking like it's $9 million is what they're estimating it will cost just to redo the roofing on a building that's now
20 years old.
about 20 years old. So that's going to be a chunk of change, and that's not even anything major. I think at Middlesex, they're also talking about like having to redo the HVAC system, and because part of the building is quite old, and then the extension is substantially older than the high school is. So that's going to be something they have to look into once HHR is done.
To put into perspective, at the Board of Ed meeting, I mentioned after I was talking about that the town has supported the Board of Ed with the building of all these schools, I mentioned Middlesex, and I lowballed it at $50 million. And in my conversations offline with several people, they actually said, Jack, if we get to 50 million, we would be ecstatic, But I'm really anticipating, I'm not saying it from them, but I'm anticipating that Middlesex will be a $75 million project.
Yeah.
Some 50,000 foot observation. One 50,000 foot observation here is that the HHR, one of the reasons why it's so expensive is that this work should have been done 15 years ago. You know, the portable classrooms being removed and the work that is required to have taken those out and to be brought up to speed. I mean, Mike Lynch used to be the chief engineer for the school system, and that guy should have a PhD in engineering of old and decrepit buildings, and literally was keeping a boiler running that was built in 1940, and nobody ever made any parts for it anymore. And he was able to keep those a lot of those physical plants running when they were long past their life expectancy.
Well, as for to put other things in perspective, because I've been here for a while in town, my eldest turned 40 this year. And when she was at Oxridge, because at that time from where we lived, you went Oxridge and then Royal, and I don't know which one was first, but you either went Hindley, Tokenique, or Tokenique Hindley. I'm not sure which, because Holmes wasn't opened at the time. That's when we put in the portables, and the portables were only supposed to be temporary classrooms, and we're finally getting them out like 30 years later. Yeah, Dan, it really is funny. It is funny.
Yeah.
So,
And Jack, I would assume something as major as a $75 million renovation on Middlesex, there'd be another debt issuance to finance that, or at least a good chunk of that. Like we're gonna
well, no, figure all of that, because we don't have 75 million sitting in our cash fund.
yeah, like there's going to be significant pressure on our AAA credit rating, isn't there? Because we're going to also have to, borrow quite a bit more to complete Great Island. We paid for the acquisition, but we haven't even started the development of Great Island.
You see, let me touch base on that, because I think some people are, I'm not sure on that yet. All right. As for Great Island, they originally, we had over $100 million that we approved. $11 million was subsequently retired from that authorization. And we haven't even spent or bonded all of the money. There's like a working fund of about $6 million that's there for the expansion of the road, which is has the issue with the trees, and some other mitigation on environmental and access and other things like that. So we have some funding that we've already approved. The cost to operate Great Island, which is the operations cost, which initially was being done by several employees that the family had, but we moved up $225,000 into a fund last year to cover that, because we were still getting some rents, and we will get rents through July, and we haven't spent it. Now again, they're not allocating hours from the Public Works Department to that fund, because we don't have that type of cost accounting system. But we're pretty much going to be able to cover the operating costs of Great Island. They're not, it's not a lot. What we're paying on debt, $4.5–5 million spread over 30 years, was a sunk cost. When it was approved, it wasn't that we were looking for extra revenue or anything like that to cover that. All we were doing was saying, we want the property, we'll figure out what we're going to do with it. And if we don't do anything for it for a number of years, that's okay. This committee actually told Monica, when she was the first selectman, she one time said we had 4 canvases on that property, and one of them was the wilderness. And the F&B committee went back to Monica and said as far as the F&B committee, that canvas, that's wilderness, we'd like it to stay blank. In other words, don't do anything. All right, so that was just our input into when they were first discussed. They haven't decided, they're first working on that now, they're almost completed with the first phase to say, here's what's going on. And so they haven't decided what capital will be done. When one of our members and then this committee, we did a 5-year pro forma that we presented to the RTM because that we thought that was necessary. And in my professional life, doing 5-year pro formas were just, you know, how some people do crosswords. So we were easily able to do that. We added debt on. And if we're doing capital, we are going to most probably bond that capital. And so even if we do $10 million of investment, we're talking about adding only $800,000 a year on a 20-year bond debt, you know, using the typical mortgage rate of 8%. And Louisa is much better at telling me what the real number should be. But we also don't know whether or not we're not going to be doing some private, public-private investment there. So for the capital, that's still outstanding, even what we're going to do. And I'm not sure that all the capital on what we're doing with those buildings, what we're doing with the mansion, the stables, that anything's going to be done for the next 2-3 years. So, I mean, this is a longer term. One of the things that I think a lot of us believe is, you know, anything you do immediately in the first year was a mistake, because this is a long-term investment and you have to make sure that what we are doing there has long-term benefits for what the strategy is for that, which is what they're working on now. So I don't think Great Island really on the capital investments are going to go any place near what these schools are. We're also paying down significant amount of debt. I can get the debt schedule from the Director of Finance or Town Administrator that will be talking about of what we're paying off over the next 5 years. And so while we're paying some things off, that's what we're adding on to the debt. And from what we hear from our bond counsel on that, because we have high real estate values and high earnings, you know, median mean earnings of the members of this town, and we have such a high collection rate on our taxes, the amount of debt that we can handle, and I think John Zagroski did a short video on this, and if he didn't, he plans to. We have more than enough capacity to take this debts on. Now, that being said, for the last couple of years, I have been vocal that some of our smaller items, we should no longer be bonding, and we should just pay for it out of collection of taxes, right? It was one thing, and I went before the RTM, this committee went before the RTM and told us to do a lot of bonding previously, but rates were basically zero. So when the rates were really low, it made sense to bond things. It was free money. And over 20 years, it was minimal. But as rates has gone up, and as the Fed is not readily cutting rates as quickly as what some people would have hoped, and our desire to do